He was born in a world that offered him nothing but struggle. A small wooden cabin stood deep in the forests of Kentucky. No wealth, no comfort, only silence, poverty, and endless uncertainty. The year was 1809. A child entered the world who would one day reshape a nation. But at that moment, he was just Abraham Lincoln, a boy destined to grow in the shadow of hardship. Life did not welcome him gently. The land he called home was rough and unforgiving. His hands learned labor before they learned writing. Every sunrise demanded survival. Every sunset brought exhaustion. When he was just a child, tragedy struck his life. He lost his mother at a very young age. The warmth of childhood vanished in a single moment. The house became quieter, and his world became heavier. Soon, even education became a distant dream. Books were rare. Schooling was shorter than the seasons, but curiosity never left him. He read by firelight. He learned from borrowed pages, and every word he consumed became a step away from poverty. People around him saw only a poor boy, tall, awkward, dressed in worn clothes. But inside him, something was growing, a mind that refused to stay small. Years passed and the wilderness shaped him. He worked as a laborer, a rail splitter, a farmhand. Every job added strength to his body and depth to his suffering. But suffering was not his end. It was his foundation. He began to discover something powerful. Words had power, truth had weight, and justice had a voice. He taught himself law not in classrooms, but through nights of silence and determination. Books became his teachers, and discipline became his companion. Slowly he stepped into the world of law and politics, not as a privileged man, but as a self-made voice from the ground up. In the courtroom, something changed. When Lincoln spoke, people listened. Not because he shouted, but because every word carried truth. His tall figure stood like a shadow of honesty in a corrupt world. His arguments were simple, but deeply powerful. He was not born into power. He earned attention through clarity of mind and integrity of speech. The political world began to notice him, a man without aristocracy, a man without elite support, yet a man with something far greater, conviction. As America grew divided over slavery and freedom, Lincoln's voice became sharper, not violent, but firm, not hateful, but unbreakable. He believed something radical for his time, that every human being deserves dignity, no matter their color, no matter their birth, no matter their chains. This belief would not make him popular, but it would make him historic. The country was moving toward chaos. Tension between North and South was rising, and beneath the surface, a storm was forming. Abraham Lincoln was not yet president, but destiny was already pulling him forward, step by step, moment by moment, toward a role he could not escape, a role that would test not only his leadership, but the soul of an entire nation. And as the world moved closer to war, Lincoln stood at the edge of history, unknown to many, unstoppable in purpose. The boy from the wilderness was no longer just a boy, he was becoming a force that would one day challenge an empire of injustice and rewrite the meaning of freedom itself. The United States stood on the edge of collapse. A nation built on hope was now divided by hatred. One country, two visions, freedom on one side and slavery on the other. And in the middle of this rising storm, a man from the wilderness was about to take command. Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860. But his victory did not bring celebration across the nation. It brought fear, anger, and rebellion. For many southern states, his name did not represent leadership. It represented danger. Because Lincoln believed something that shook the foundation of America, that slavery must not spread, and eventually it must end. Before he even took full control of the presidency, the nation began to break apart. One by one, Southern states started to secede, leaving the Union behind. The country he was meant to lead was falling apart in his hands. Then came the moment history could no longer avoid: war. The Civil War began in 1861. Brother against brother, state against state, family against family. The United States was no longer united. It was bleeding from within. Lincoln was not a military man. He was not trained in war. But he carried the weight of command on his shoulders. Every decision he made could save lives or destroy them. The pressure was unbearable. Generals demanded strategy. Politicians demanded victory. And citizens demanded peace. But peace was not something he could simply choose. It had to be earned through fire. He became a wartime president. His office turned into a center of crisis. Maps covered his desk, reports arrived every hour, and death became a daily reality. Battle after battle shook the nation. Thousands fell, cities burned, families disappeared into grief. And yet Lincoln remained steady, not because he was fearless, but because he refused to collapse under fear. He faced criticism from all sides. Some said he was too soft. Others said he was too harsh. But Lincoln was guided by something deeper than opinion: purpose. He believed the Union must survive. Because if the United States fell apart, so would the hope of freedom itself. Behind closed doors, he struggled deeply. He wrote letters filled with sorrow. He questioned decisions. He carried grief that few could see. But publicly, he stood as the face of endurance. As the war continued, a greater moral question rose above the battlefield. What is the meaning of freedom? And who deserves it? Lincoln began to shift the purpose of the war. It was no longer only about saving the Union. It was becoming something greater, a fight against slavery itself. And in this transformation, history began to change direction. In 1863, he made one of the most powerful decisions of his life, a document that would shake the world, the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that enslaved people in Confederate states were to be free, not as a suggestion, but as a war objective. It did not instantly end slavery everywhere, but it changed the meaning of the war forever. Now the battlefield was not only political, it was moral: freedom versus oppression. Enslaved people began to flee toward Union lines. They saw hope where there was once only chains. The war intensified, the struggle deepened, and the cost grew heavier. But Lincoln did not step back, even when the world felt like it was burning. He held on to one belief: that a nation cannot survive half free and half enslaved. Every speech he gave carried weight. Every decision shaped destiny. And slowly, the tide of war began to shift. The Union forces started gaining ground. The Confederacy began to weaken, but victory was still far away. And Lincoln knew something others did not. Winning the war would not be enough. America would need to be rebuilt, not just in land but in soul. As 1864 approached, the pressure reached its peak. The nation was exhausted, and Lincoln's leadership was tested like never before. Yet he remained in office, because the mission was not complete, not yet. The storm was still raging, but the horizon was beginning to change. And somewhere beyond the smoke of war, a new America was waiting to be born. The war was ending, but peace had not yet arrived. America was exhausted. A nation once divided by ideology was now broken by blood. And at the center of it all, Abraham Lincoln stood as a man carrying the weight of victory and grief at the same time. The Civil War was finally coming to its final chapters. The Confederacy was collapsing. One by one, its resistance was fading. After years of unimaginable destruction, the Union had survived. But survival was not enough for Lincoln. He had dreamed of something greater than victory. He had dreamed of transformation. A nation not just reunited, but reborn. In 1865, a historic moment arrived. The United States began to step into a new era. Slavery, the institution that had divided the country for generations, was officially brought to an end through the 13th Amendment. Chains that had held millions were legally broken. A system that had defined centuries of suffering was finally declared over. For Lincoln, this was not just politics. It was the fulfillment of a moral promise, but victory carried shadows. Because freedom came at an unimaginable cost. Hundreds of thousands had died, cities were destroyed, families were shattered forever. Lincoln did not celebrate loudly, he reflected deeply. Because he understood something others often forget. That freedom is never free. The nation now faced a new challenge: reconstruction. How do you rebuild a country that has torn itself apart? Lincoln believed in healing over punishment, in unity over revenge, in rebuilding over destruction. He wanted former Confederate states to return to the Union peacefully. Not as enemies, but as citizens of the same broken home. Many disagreed with him. Tensions remained high. Anger still lingered in the air. But Lincoln stayed committed to one vision: a united America. He once spoke words that still echo through history. A nation cannot endure half slave and half free. And now, that vision had taken its first breath of reality. But just as peace began to rise, darkness struck. On the night of April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The nation was finally healing. The war was over, hope was returning, but history was about to change forever. A gunshot echoed through the theater. Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a moment that froze time itself. The man who had preserved the Union, the man who had ended slavery, the man who had carried a nation through its darkest war, was gone. The world fell into shock. America mourned. And history stood still, but death could not undo what he had built. Lincoln's body was carried through grieving cities. Millions mourned. His name became more than a leader. It became a symbol. A symbol of freedom, a symbol of unity, a symbol of sacrifice. The war he led was over, but the legacy he left had only begun. Because Lincoln did not just end a war, he redefined a nation. He proved that leadership is not about power. It is about responsibility, about sacrifice, about standing firm when the world is collapsing. From a wooden cabin in the wilderness, to the highest office in America, to immortality in human history, his journey was unlike any other. Abraham Lincoln did not just belong to America. He belonged to humanity, because his story is not just about the past. It is about what freedom demands from every generation. And even today, long after his voice fell silent, his vision still speaks. A nation cannot endure half free and half enslaved. And because of him, the meaning of freedom was changed forever.